Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson from the 24th and final chapter in the book of Joshua. The book of Joshua is arranged. The first 12 chapters describes the conquest of Canaan under the biographical protagonist Joshua, who's the general leader of Israel, the successor of Moses, who actually led them into the promised land. And then the next 10 chapters describe the divisions between the tribal allotments. And then the final two chapters, the 23rd and the 24th, are sort of his farewell addresses. He gathers in the 23rd chapter all the elders, officers, but in the 24th chapter he's elders, heads, and judges, officers, everyone who was anyone was there. This was his final farewell address. These were his parting words, and the location of which was Shechem. This would have been located near the tribal division land, the division of the tribal lands of Ephraim and Manasseh, the two half-tribes, both descended from Joseph, and Joseph is one of the three people who are buried in this chapter. Joshua read of his death in this chapter. Therefore, whoever wrote the book of Joshua could not have been Joshua himself. But he just reminds them of their heritage and their history. Third verse, "So I took your father Abraham from beyond the river and caused him to go unto the land of Canaan and multiplied his offspring and gave him Isaac." Abraham was born into an idolatrous land. His father worshipped idols. The city of Ur, the place where he was born, was an idolatrous city, but God saw something in Abraham that he didn't see in anyone else. He saw the potential for a faith that could found a nation, and he gave him the promised offspring, Isaac, when he was 99 years old. This child of promise was born through his barren wife, his hitherto barren wife, a miraculous birth, and he was in the land of Canaan, and Shechem was the place in Genesis 12:6 where he was promised the land as far as he could see. And this is also another place where Jacob in Genesis 33:20 built an altar, and it's also passed down to Joseph, whose bones were in Egypt but are transplanted to here, and Joseph is the ancestor of Joshua, who hails from the tribe of Ephraim, which would grow to be the mightiest one in the northern kingdom. Verses 6 through 7 are more recent history. He just describes the passage from Isaac to Jacob and his selection over Esau and how they went down to Egypt. Then Aaron and Moses were the leaders of the Exodus, and then all the plagues. Then verse 6, "And I brought your fathers out of Egypt, and you came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued your fathers with chariots and horsemen to the Sea of the Reeds." The Sea of Reeds was not the Mediterranean Sea, the sea that would have been adjacent to the Promised Land. They are still in Egypt, and they are escaping, so they are near the Sea of Reeds. That's the Red Sea, which is to the east of Egypt, separating it between the Sinai Peninsula. And on their journey to the Promised Land, while being redeemed from after the 10th and final plague had rendered its effect, they were liberated to go, but then Pharaoh, being a hard-hearted man, changes his mind, gathers his chariots, and by the time they meet them, the Red Sea parts, so it becomes dry ground on land for the Israelites to pass straight through, but then it reverts back to its water state when the Egyptian's chariot comes and he drowns the entire army of the Egyptians in pursuit of them. Many of them might have lived to see it. Most of the generation present were not. Most of the generation living by the second year, which was the pivotal year of the Exodus, the one where Joshua went on the scouting journey, the duration of their Exodus was determined by the 38 days. Joshua and Caleb alone responded with the faithful response to the presence of giants in the land. They said, "Let's go right in. We have all the strength we need in Yahweh." The others were walking by sight, and for their lack of faith, they were forced to wander for 40 years. But this generation here is now, they would have heard that. It would have been straight from the grapevine from their immediate ancestors. "And they cried out to Yahweh, and he put thick darkness between you and the Egyptians, and brought the sea upon them, and covered him. And your eyes saw what I did in Egypt, and you dwelt in a wilderness a long time." So the event was already described, the miracle of the parting of the Red Sea. It swallowed them whole. It covered them completely. They drowned. Horses cannot swim. And heavily armorly clad cavalrymen are not going to be able to swim, so they drowned and just in the water. And their eyes, now most of them were not there, but they saw people who saw this happen. And the 40-year, remember, the length of their wilderness wandering was determined by a situation and a response which Joshua alone was faithful to. So Joshua was Moses' intended and designated successor. He was marked to be the one who would lead the nation of Israel after Moses' death, and he did just that, and he is the one under whom they entered into the promised land and were able to conquer it and claim it. And then they just he continues with his reminder of history. Balak, the Mesopotamian soothsayer, and Balaam. Actually, Balak was the king who hired Balaam. He's an infamous figure who is hired to issue a curse, but he is interrupted by a direct intervention of Yahweh, who forces him to tell the truth and bless. He cannot curse who Yahweh has blessed. It's an irresistible force, and he resisted him. And then he describes in the 11th verse all the nations that they came into, all the lands: the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. They all fought against them, and they won over all them. Verses 13, and I gave you a land for which you did not labor, and cities which you did not build, and you dwell in them. You eat of the vineyards and olive trees which you did not plant. That they had this entire civilized apparatus to inherit was wholly an act of grace. They did not build the cities that they were inhabiting. They did not build the homes they were living in. They took it from people who were settled there. But this was because they had the divine power and the blessing and the sanction of the mission, which enabled them to walk into the land of milk and honey and claim it. There was some struggle, they had to fight a significant amount of fighting against all these people, but they were able to claim what they claimed because he was working on their behalf. And now fear Yahweh, serve him in perfection and in truth, and put away the mighty ones with your fathers serve beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve Yahweh. The word serve appears for the first of 33 times in the 14th verse that we read all the way to verse 33. So that concept and word of serve is significant here. We are to be servants of the Almighty. We serve him, and we have the standard of absolute perfection as revealed in the law, and the law is also truth. But these idols, now Abraham came from an idolatrous land, so there were mighty ones beyond the river, the Euphrates. That's where Abraham was born, and then all the interchange of these polytheistic pantheons. Some of them crept in from Egypt, but they were all foreign and they were all unacceptable. Idols were insufficient and inadequate to represent the invisible creator of all that was visible. So it was forbidden amongst the Israelites. And if it seems evil in your eyes to serve Yahweh, choose for yourselves this day whom you are going to serve, whether the mighty ones which your fathers served that were beyond the river, or the mighty ones of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But I and my house, we serve Yahweh. This is a day of decision, a day of choosing, and daily we have to choose. Who do we serve? Do we serve ourselves? Do we serve God? Do we please men? Do we please him? And what are we after? So what are we in service to? And the idols of their old life were all these wooden and clay figures that they could physically discard of just these imaginary deities. But the idols in our life, the old life, the idols of modernity, all these sources of satisfaction that are available on instant idols, technology becomes an idol in our life, and one of the old life that we have to discard in order to serve Yahweh fully. And neutrality is an illusion, and wholehearted devotion and commitment is precisely what we are called for. No man can serve two masters, for he will love the one and despise the other. And we have to love Yahweh, and we will despise him if we share that love, and we signal our contempt for him by not following him and obeying him when he tells us to give us the uncompromised love, loyalty, adoration, and affection. 16th verse lesson itself. And the people answered and said, far be it from us to forsake Yahweh, to serve other mighty ones. This is a faithful response. The people say what they mean and meant what they said. These people did live in, after Joshua expired, the generation that had conquered the land, the one that had come out of the desert and just did the actual fighting, they were a faithful generation and all flourished. But then everything falls apart once the people get settled and inhabited. They take for granted the land that they did not fight for, the houses they did not build, the vineyards they did not plant. and then they eventually forsake them. So, but for this moment in time, they meant what they said. But the author, in all likelihood, included this as an ominous, because remember, he's writing from hindsight. He's writing of history, so he's this connects to the book of Judges, where suddenly they find themselves at the mercy and going through cycles of domination by foreigners through apostasy, because they had forsaken Yahweh, they had forsaken the covenant, and he had forsaken them to their enemies as a consequence of their covenantal violations. So they deviated from their exclusive concentration and served these other mighty ones. For Yahweh our Elohim is he who has brought us out of our fathers, out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage, who did these great signs before our eyes, and has guarded us in all the way we went, and among the people through whom we passed. This was fresh enough on their memory as to, this was only a generation or two ago. This generation was in the wilderness. They would have been born there, the people who walked in and conquered, and the elders who outlived Joshua. They would have been born. Joshua was born a slave in Egypt, and he spent 40 years of his life wandering in the wilderness. And when he was 85 years old, that's when he entered into the promised land, and he lived to be 110. So this is not quite a biography of Joshua, but it is the book of Joshua is a document in detail of the exploits of the hero, of the human protagonist. Who lived, he witnessed all these signs. He was there at the parting of the water and in the Red Sea, and just all these people, these 7 nations, these established people, they were able to walk in. They had to struggle and they had to fight, and there were some mishaps due to their own disobedience, most famously Achan's greed in the 7th chapter, which temporarily set back the inexorable advancement of the Israeli army. And Yahweh drove out before us all the people, even the Amorites who dwelt in the land. We too serve Yahweh, for he is our Elohim. They want to serve the one who had enabled them, but it was by his grace and his power that they were able to displace or not be vanquished by the Amorites. These were a settled people, and they had dwelt in the land. They were there before Israel came. They were coming with pitchforks, and they had to confront towns, cities such as Jericho, a city with walls so thick that you could ride chariots on top. And they had pitchforks, but they walked around it 7 times, and then it collapsed, and they were able to walk in. Because the walls, they didn't come tumbling down, they sank in, and archaeological excavation reveals that the walls of this period literally sank in. There is no tumbling, no collapse, as the famous song, which has instilled much of that confusion. Then Joshua said to the people, "You are not able to serve Yahweh, for he is a sacred Elohim, a jealous El is he. He does not bear with you your transgressions and with your sins." Joshua is warning them. He wants them to know what they're getting into. He's just exposing the fallacy of relying on, of thinking that we are in ourselves adequate to serve Yahweh. None of us are worthy, but we do try to partake in our service in a worthy manner, because he is worthy of our very best. He is sacred and he is jealous. Now, jealous may strike a little misunderstanding as to what it is. Now, jealousy, envy is sinful. Jealousy is not necessarily sinful. It's not unrighteous for a man and a woman who are married to be jealous over their mutual exclusivity, and it is not unrighteous for Yahweh to be jealous when we worship other idols, other gods, look to other sources of satisfaction for our panaceas, when he's calling to us the whole time, and he just wants us to reach out to him and make the most of it. But he reserves his wrath. His wrath is closely connected to his jealousy, and his wrath is righteous as is his jealousy. And so this alternately translates as he does not forgive with your transgression, but this bear is, I think, the better word, because he does not stomach or withstand. He does not digest when we sin. That is an offense to him. It doesn't injure him, but it does offend him, and we just want to bear that in mind. If you forsake Yahweh and shall serve mighty ones of a stranger, then he shall turn back and do you evil and consume you after he has been good to you. So they don't want to get in his bad side. We learn that they have been on his good side and they know what it's like and they want to stay there forever. But, he does have a bad side and it's not easy. All you have to do is turn the other way and he will turn on you. So the karmic boomerang and law of effect is if we treat him the way he deserves to be treated, he will treat us the way we would like to be treated. If we disregard him and show him contempt and just usurp his own authority, make ourselves our own master, then, we cannot be angry at him when he makes us not prosper. And the people said to Joshua, "No, but we will serve Yahweh." This is their second time, their second affirmation, and we should give credit where credit is due. This is an honest declaration. This is not braggadocio. The people did serve Yahweh. So the life of Joshua and the after effect are a blissful interlude in Israel's otherwise troubled history. This is a generation that was completely faithful. They're the ones who came out of the desert and walked into the promised land and set it up and worshipped Yahweh, but then their children worshiped the idols and all these things started creeping in. But the generation of Joshua and his leadership, now he did not have a designated or named successor, but these elders were so righteous that it was not necessary for that to happen. But then what happened is that they died and an unrighteous generation sprang up and they were leaderless and therefore subjectable to the foreign domination. Then Joshua said to his people, "You are witnesses against yourself that you have chosen Yahweh for yourself to serve him." And they said, "Witnesses." They affirmed they wasted no time disputing or disagreeing. They were in complete and instant agreement that they were willing to be what he said he was. He said that they were witnesses. Now, this was a solemn occasion. Remember, they had gathered and prostrated themselves, presented themselves before Elohim in the first verse. So they were witnesses to that, and they had a witness in the sky, and he lays the seventh and final memorial, a physical structure, which bears as a witness. And the number 7 is numerologically significant in Scripture. It is the number of wholeness, perfection, completeness, and divinity. But we're not quite there yet. "And now put away the mighty ones of the stranger, which are in your midst, and incline your heart to Yahweh Elohim of Israel." Discard them. These were physical objects and edifices. These were figures of wood and figures of stone and figures of clay and just figures of the earth. Now, these deities had no metaphysical substance outside of the physical properties which made the idols, and the way that it was thought is that they could worship them through these physical vessels of these deities with their own jurisdiction over certain elements or certain geographical terrains. But he's telling them to get rid of those things, get them out of there, toss them, get rid of them, and incline your heart to Yahweh. Do a 180 reversal from the idols to the ones in whose image we are made. We make idols in our own image, and so they are not moral role models, but he is the complete personification and embodiment of moral perfection, the one who we are told to incline our hearts towards. Yahweh Elohim of Israel. He does not belong exclusively to Israel, but we are Israel in this general sense. "And the people said to Joshua, Yahweh our Elohim we serve, and his voice we obey." This is the third time. The threefold repetition is significant. That means something. It's the 3 times that Peter denies, and then in John's 21st chapter, he says that he loves him 3 times. So we witness that also here. 3, they know the one they serve. That word serve comes again. Remember, it appears about 33 times between verses 14 and 33. And in his voice do we obey. Now, there is a chorus of competing and conflicting voices competing for our attention. Each of us has its own message, its own lure, its own promise. But the voice of our better angels, the voice of heaven, is the one we need to listen to. So that's the voice we need to hearken onto and obey, and really seek it out and live by it and learn from it and do it. And Joshua made a covenant with the people that day and laid on them a law and a just judgment in Shechem. So a covenant would have been a geopolitical term. It would have been the treaties, the terms of arrangement of coexistence between superior and inferior geopolitical entities initiated by the superior power. So the covenant in this covenant is lowercase. So he's doing it between Israel, and he's laying on them a law and a just the judgment. The law would have been nothing original to Joshua. It would have been what was written by Moses and the judge. So Shechem once more is the location. That is the where it is all happening. And Joshua wrote these words in the book of the Torah of Elohim, and he took a large stone and put it up there under the oak that was by the temple of Yahweh. So Joshua records these words physically. He adds to the law of Moses, which prior to that point would have been Moses. Now, in reality, the writing of the Pentateuch and the Pentateuch was not until the reign of Solomon that it was actually written down. What they had was oral tradition, so these survived. Moses was the creative genius, but he was not the author of the Pentateuch, but he was the one who set the oral tradition, which would have been recorded some centuries later. The ancients had a lot more attuned memories than we moderns. But then, and he took the large stone. So this is the seventh witness, and the oak is the recognizable location, and the temple is not the temple. It just would have been the tabernacle. That word is, this translation retains much of the Hebrew original. And Joshua said to all the people, "See, this stone is a witness to us, for it has heard all the words of Yahweh which he spoke to us, and shall be a witness against you, lest you lie against your Elohim." So the stone is a visible sign and a witness and a reminder of the covenant of the oath that they had entered into. They swore 3 times while prostrating themselves, presenting themselves before Elohim, that they would not forsake him, they would serve him and obey him. And this physical reminder, this stone, was a witness. So every time they looked at it, they would have a reminder of what they had said. And this is the 7th such stone that is a memorial throughout the book of Joshua. And remember, 7 is the number numerologically, the numerological significance of the number 7 in the Hebrew numerology is indicative of divinity, perfection, thoroughness, completeness, and totality. And if you lie against your Elohim, that witness is going to witness against you. That's going to be there to remind Elohim that you're lying to him. Then Joshua set the people away, each to his own inheritance. They had conquered the land. They had distributed amongst themselves. There were 12 tribes in the land of Israel, 9 of which were in the promised land. I believe that Transjordanic were the tribes of Reuben and Gad and at least one other, maybe Simeon. But the important thing is they all had conquered. It was all equally distributed, and they all had their land and tribal territories, and these lands would have been invested in the original owners, and they would have had sabbatical cycles where the ownership of the land would have reverted to the original owners. And after these events, it came to be that Joshua son of Nun, the servant of Yahweh, died 110 years old. So after what just happened, the final farewell address and the setting up of the stone and the witness and the reminder, he passes away. He lived a long life of 110 years, the same duration of time that his ancestor Joseph did. He lived to be 110 years, we read of in Genesis 50:26, according to the Egyptian mindset. That would have been the ideal lifespan. So that signals a life well lived, and Joshua lived the same length of life. Moses lived to be 140 years old, and length of life is often the righteous do live inordinately long times. Abraham 175, Moses 140, Joshua and Joseph 110. And they buried him within the border of the inheritance at Timnath Serah, which is in the mountains of Ephraim, and the north side of Mount Gaish. So the tribal territory in Ephraim would have been to the north, and so much so that they became the dominant territory of the 10 northern kingdom tribes, so much so that that kingdom came to be known alternately as Ephraim, so named for the dominant tribe therein. And Joshua was an Ephraimite, and he was as such, he would have been a descendant of Joseph, and Ephraim was his second son. Manasseh was his elder, but he blessed the second-born. Jacob did when here, and so Ephraim became the dominant one. But in the tribal division, the brothers were located next to each other, and Shechem would have been right at the border in between their territories. Would have been on Ephraim's side, but next to the tribal territory of Manasseh. But this location is distinct from Shechem. Timnath-Serah, we read that it's in the north of Mount Gaash, so probably northern and western. And Israel served Yahweh all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had known all the works of Yahweh, which he had done for Israel. This was a generation of miracles. They had lived and witnessed miracles, beginning with the crossing of the Jordan River. It dried up for them in the 4th chapter, and then they just, another miracle happened when they walked around Jericho, the city with walls so thick that chariots could pass. They had pitchforks and just these primitive weapons. They did not have sophisticated siege equipment, yet they were able to enter into the wall because they obeyed the instructions that they did. So they had lived with and witnessed and benefited from miracles, and they had maintained the faith. They had responded faithfully. They were mindful of the power in ways that their ancestors, their fathers, the Exodus generation, were not. They had witnessed the parting of the sea. Joshua reviews it, and he's just reminding them that the author of Joshua is reminding them here that they had witnessed these miracles. And it's not until the 6th chapter of Judges that we read the next miracle, some 250 years hence, when Gideon is visited by a miracle. And the bones of Joseph, which the children of Israel had brought up out of Egypt, they burn at Shechem in a plot of ground where Jacob had bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 coins, which would become an inheritance for the children of Joseph. Bones of Joseph. Joseph was born in Canaan, but he went down to Egypt where he flourished, and he would have died there. But in the 50th chapter of Genesis, we read that that when his father Jacob died, he adamantly insisted that he be buried in the land of his ancestors. Joseph, evidently, his bones remained in Egypt, but when the Exodus finally comes up, they come up with their bones, and they bury them in the same place where Joshua had delivered his farewell address. And this has history and significance because this was a field that Jacob had brought for 100 silver coins, and it became his inheritance to the children of Joseph. Joseph was the favored son, the firstborn of his most beloved wife, Rachel. And Eleazar, son of Aaron, died, and they buried him in a hill that belonged to Phinehas his son, which was given to him in the hill country of Ephraim. Eleazar would have been the son of Aaron the older brother, 3 years older than Moses, who served as his high priest and initially his mouthpiece. When Moses was nervous about his speaking abilities, he was given Aaron as his mouthpiece. Then Aaron established the priesthood, which is hereditary. Eleazar was his son. He had 2 sons who offered fire on their own terms, and they were burned in the fire that they offered. So Eleazar was the one who inherited the high priesthood, and his son Phinehas was born. And the Levites, they had no tribal territory. They were, to live off of Yahweh and the tithing, and they had no territory to speak of, but he had a house or a hill that was given to him that was located in the tribal territory of Ephraim. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Take care. Bye-bye.